My ex left our family to chase real love. Years later, she came back with a new husband, two more kids, and an expectation that I'd just help raise them all, financially, emotionally, even logistically, like nothing had changed. At first, I laughed. I thought she was joking. But when she said with a straight face that I should cover costs for school trips, gifts, and even vacations for her new kids, kids who aren't mine, never were mine, I realized she was serious. I told her no, firmly, respectfully, but what followed was a full-blown storm. Accusations from her, cold shoulders from her husband, guilt trips from her family. Suddenly, I was the bad guy for doing right by the only two people I actually owed anything to, my twins. So I stopped defending myself. I decided to show them exactly where I stood, with actions, not apologies. And what I did do next, let's just say they'll never forget it. I met Tina at a friend's engagement party. She wasn't the type I usually went for. Too serious, a little sharp around the edges, but somehow that night we clicked. Maybe it was the free-flowing wine or the fact that we were both a little tired of the dating scene. Either way, we talked all night. I remember thinking, she's not perfect, but she's real. A few weeks turned into a few months. Things moved fast. We weren't exactly head over heels, but we were comfortable. It felt safe, adult, responsible. And then she got pregnant for twins. I remember staring at the ultrasound screen and feeling like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. 2 heartbeats, 2 tiny lives. I wasn't ready to be a dad, let alone to 2 babies. But something shifted in me that day. I looked at Tina and I said, "We'll figure this out." To her credit, she didn't panic. She said we could try to make it work for the babies. And that's what we did. I moved into her apartment. It was small and cluttered with old blinds that never fully closed and a creaky kitchen floor that squeaked no matter how carefully you stepped. But it became our home. I sold my car to buy a safer one with car seats, took on freelance projects at night to build up savings, attended parenting classes, even though I was the only guy in most of them. We read books on twins, we argued over names, we painted the nursery together, light green walls and little animal decals on the ceiling. She loved elephants, so we bought matching onesies and hung a wooden elephant mobile above the cribs. I wasn't perfect, far from it, but I was all in. And when the twins were born, everything else faded away. Holding them for the first time felt like falling into something bigger than myself. I cried, so did she. At that moment, we weren't 2 people trying to force a relationship. We were just 2 new parents in awe of what we'd made. For a while, it worked. We didn't have fireworks, but we had a rhythm. I'd take the night feedings, she'd handle mornings. We split diaper duty. I became a master swaddler. We were tired and tense, but we were in it together, and that meant something. There were glimpses of something more, too. Times when she'd fall asleep on my shoulder during a late-night feeding, or when we'd laugh over how our daughter made a face that looked exactly like Tina's mother's disapproving glare. But as the babies grew, the cracks in our foundation widened. We wanted different things. She missed going out. I just wanted to sleep. She talked about traveling when the kids got older. I was calculating daycare costs. It was like we were building the same house, but from different blueprints. Still, I tried. I held on longer than I should have because I believed the effort mattered. Because when you make a family, you don't just walk away, you show up. And that's what I did every day, every night, even when I was exhausted, even when it felt like Tina was already somewhere else emotionally. I showed up. Maybe that's why it hurt so much when she didn't. After we split, things were surprisingly civil, at least at first. Tina and I agreed on a 50/50 custody schedule. We both loved the twins. We both wanted them to grow up happy and balanced. There was no court battle, no shouting matches, no dramatic threats, just 2 people trying to figure out how to co-parent without screwing everything up. It worked for a while. Then she met Paul. At first, I was glad for her. He seemed decent, kind to the kids, stable job, had a daughter the same age as our twins, which Tina thought was perfect because they could grow up like siblings. She mentioned it casually at drop-off one day, her tone almost proud. Isn't it sweet they already share toys like real sisters? I smiled and nodded, not thinking much of it, but that was the beginning. The next time I picked the kids up, she asked if I could take Paul's daughter too. Just for the afternoon, she said. She gets sad when her new sisters leave. I said, sure, one time wouldn't kill me. Then it happened again and again. And slowly, it stopped being a request and became an expectation. I'd get a message, hey, can you take Allie this weekend too? Paul and I have plans. Or, can you bring an extra snack for her? She likes the same ones as your kids. No please, no offer to trade days, just a given that I'd step in. At first, I didn't want to make a scene. I thought maybe this is just an adjustment period. But the more I accommodated, the more it escalated. On my weekends, I found myself hauling 3 kids to the zoo, the park, and the movies. When I bought matching backpacks for my twins, Tina asked why Allie didn't get one too. It's not fair, she said. She'll feel left out. I reminded her, gently, that Allie wasn't my child. You're being petty, she snapped. The girls see each other as sisters. I wanted to say, well, biology disagrees, but I bit my tongue. Then came the birthday situation. I threw a party for my twins at one of those trampoline places. Pizza, cake, balloons, the whole deal. Tina asked if I could include Allie. I said she could come, of course. I wasn't going to exclude a kid. But then Tina asked if I could get her a gift so she doesn't feel weird. So I did. But when she opened her gift and it wasn't as big or flashy as what I'd gotten my own kids, Tina pulled me aside and said, you need to be more mindful of their feelings. These kids see each other as equals. That was the moment. Something snapped in me. I realized I was being slowly pushed into a role I never agreed to play. I wasn't just dad. I was now expected to be stepdad, co-producer, and emotional safety net for every kid Tina decided to fold into her life. And the worst part? She made me feel guilty whenever I hesitated, like I was failing some moral test by not extending my love and money beyond my own children. It was subtle at first, but those signs, the requests, the assumptions, the passive-aggressive remarks stacked up fast. I was no longer co-parenting. I was being managed. The breaking point came over a school trip. My twins were in a small charter school that grouped kids from multiple grade levels together. It was unconventional, but they loved it. One day, their teacher sent out a notice about a special trip to an interactive museum across the state. A big, expensive outing full of hands-on exhibits, overnight stays, and educational workshops. It wasn't cheap, but it was the kind of thing I wanted my kids to experience, so I paid for both of them in full, no hesitation. I mentioned it to Tina at pickup, thinking she'd appreciate the heads up. Instead, her face tightened. Wait, she said slowly. So only the twins are going? Well, yeah, I said, confused. They're the only ones I'm responsible for. She didn't respond right away, but the look on her face spoke volumes. 2 days later, I got a message. Can you cover Allie and Mason's trip too? Paul and I can't afford it this month. Allie was her stepdaughter. Mason was Paul's nephew, who'd been living with them temporarily, though it was becoming more permanent by the week. Neither were my kids. I stared at the text, stunned. I replied, sorry, but I'm already covering the twins. I can't take on extra costs for kids I am not related to. The response came quickly. They're a family unit, Jason. They'll feel excluded if only the twins go. Do you want that kind of division? I didn't answer right away. I needed time to think, to breathe. The next morning, I received a call. Paul, calm, polite voice. At first, we're just trying to create unity in the household, he said. When some kids get experiences the others don't, it creates resentment. I asked the question that had been burning in me since the first time Tina brought this up. Why is it my job to prevent that resentment? Why does your household's emotional balance depend on my bank account? He didn't have a real answer. He just kept repeating that it was about fairness, family. I declined again. Then the storm hit. I started receiving texts from Tina's sister. If you cared about the kids' well-being, you'd understand how damaging this is. Tina's mother called too, a woman I hadn't spoken to in over a year. You're being selfish, she told me. These children see each other as siblings. And somehow, by refusing to fund an $800 zero cents overnight for two kids who weren't mine, I'd become the villain. Even online, I wasn't safe. Paul left a comment on a Facebook photo I posted of me and the twins at the park. Real dad, step up for the whole family. Subtle, but clearly aimed at me. I tried to keep my head down and focus on my kids, but the pressure didn't stop. Tina cornered me during a drop-off and said, if the kids grow apart because of this, it's on you. That was it. I'd had enough. I asked her, do you realize what you're saying? You chose to create a blended family. You decided to bring new kids into the household, and now you're demanding I financially parent all of them because of how you structured your life? She didn't flinch. If you care about your daughters, you'll care about their siblings. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. And then came the final blow. She suggested, without blinking, that we create a shared account for family expenses. One I would fund, one they could use when group opportunities arose. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just crossing a boundary, it was bulldozing it, paving over it, and trying to build a house on top of it. I didn't yell, I didn't fight. I looked her in the eye and said, no. Her lips curled. Fine, she spat. Then don't be surprised if your daughters start feeling like outsiders in their own family. That wasn't just manipulation, it was emotional blackmail. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Tina didn't see me as a co-parent anymore. She saw me as a wallet with weekend custody. I don't think anyone prepares you for what it feels like to be cast as the bad guy when you've done everything right. After that final conversation with Tina, I went home and just sat. The kids were with her that weekend, and the silence in my apartment felt deafening. I replayed every word she'd said, every accusation, every veiled threat that my daughters might one day resent me for not loving their whole family. It hit me harder than I expected. Was I being selfish? Was I hurting my girls by trying to set boundaries? I stared at their baby pictures on the fridge, tiny faces smiling back at me, completely unaware of how messy adult life can get. I remembered holding them for the first time in the hospital, their fists barely the size of my thumbs. I'd promised them I would always protect them, but now I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. What if protecting them meant alienating them from their step-siblings? What if, in trying to stand my ground, I was planting seeds of division I couldn't fix later? For a few days, I spiraled. I didn't sleep much. I skipped the gym. I even missed a work deadline, something I hadn't done in years. Every message from Tina's side chipped away at me a little more. You're being cold. You're not thinking long-term. The kids will suffer. Even my own parents, who usually stayed out of things, suggested I be the bigger person and just help out this once. But it wasn't just once. That's what no one else seemed to see. It was becoming a pattern, a structure. And if I gave in now, it would set a precedent I couldn't undo. Still, doubt crept in. The next time I picked up the girls, my youngest climbed into the car and asked, "Daddy, why isn't Allie coming with us?" I froze. I gave some vague answers about how it was just our time together today, but she didn't look convinced. And I hated that. Hated how Tina had managed to drag our daughters into this twisting love into leverage. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of their breathing from down the hall. They were fine, happy even, but I wasn't. I felt cornered, powerless, like no matter what I chose, I'd lose something. Either my integrity or my relationship with my daughters. There was one night I sat in the living room with the lights off, scrolling through old pictures on my phone, birthdays, beach days, bedtime stories, memories we'd built together, just the three of us. And I remember thinking, is this what fatherhood is? Constantly being told you're not enough, even when you're giving everything you have. I almost texted Tina. I almost caved. I came that close to saying, fine, I'll pay for Allie and Mason this time. But something stopped me. A voice in the back of my mind, quiet, steady, reminding me that love doesn't mean submission, that boundaries aren't cruelty. Showing my daughters what self-respect looks like might be just as important as giving them a nice trip. I still wasn't okay. But for the first time in days, I felt the smallest flicker of clarity. I wasn't gonna break, not for this. Recovery didn't happen overnight, but it started with a conversation, one I didn't expect to make such a difference. It was with my friend Marcus, another single dad I'd met through a parenting group. We usually just swapped tips about bedtime routines or school lunches, but that day, I told him everything. From the trip drama to Tina's demand for me to help fund her blended family, he listened and didn't interrupt once. And when I finished, expecting him to say something diplomatic, he laughed. Full, loud laugh. Man, he said, shaking his head, you're not a father. You're a financial plan with a pulse. That broke something in me, in a good way, because he was right. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped being seen as a person. Tina and her husband didn't want a co-parent. They wanted a sponsor, someone to ease the burden of their decisions without ever consulting me on them. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight, but I was going to make it crystal clear where I stood. The next day, I sent Tina a message, calm, direct. I won't be paying for Allie or Mason's trip, and going forward, I will only be responsible for costs related to our daughters. I respect your household, but my financial responsibility ends with my kids. She didn't reply right away. When she did, it was exactly what I expected: guilt, frustration, thinly veiled insults. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my girls. That weekend, we baked cookies together, played board games, watched a nature documentary about whales that they insisted on rewatching 3 times. I realized something during those quiet hours. They didn't need extravagant vacations or matching gifts with their step-siblings. They needed presence, and I had that in spades. For the next few weeks, I doubled down on being the best dad I could be, not the most generous wallet, not the most agreeable ex, just a solid, loving father. I taught the girls how to ride their bikes without training wheels. We built a birdhouse. We wrote silly songs about their cat and performed them in the living room. I stayed off social media, avoided group chats with Tina's family, refused to engage in arguments meant to paint me as selfish. The more I ignored the noise, the clearer my mind became. One morning, during school drop-off, Tina tried again. She brought up family balance and how it sends a message when only some kids are included in things. I listened politely, then I said, your idea of balance shouldn't cost me my boundaries. She blinked. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I didn't walk away angry. I wasn't bitter. I just stopped letting her expectations define my role. It was liberating, and slowly things shifted. Tina backed off. Paul stayed quiet. Even the passive-aggressive messages from her family dried up. And through it all, my daughters, they remained happy, closer to me than ever. Not because I gave them everything, but because I stood for something, because I taught them gently and consistently that love isn't measured in what you give everyone, it's in what you protect for the ones who matter most. Things went quiet for a while after the school trip drama. I thought maybe Tina and Paul had finally accepted my boundaries. I even let myself believe that we'd reach some kind of balance. Uneasy, sure, but livable. I was wrong. It started with small comments, subtle jabs during pickup, The girls always come back talking about how nice your place is, or they seem so much more relaxed after weekends with you. I thought it was harmless at first, but one Friday afternoon, Tina called and asked to meet in person to discuss something important. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. She came in dressed like it was an interview. Neat blazer, practiced smile, a folder in her hand. My stomach sank. She didn't waste time. I've been thinking about the girls' living situation, she said, flipping open the folder. They're getting older. Stability matters more than ever, and the back and forth between homes, it's taking a toll. I nodded slowly. Okay. She glanced down, then met my eyes. They need a home where they feel fully comfortable. Both places should offer the same quality of life. There was. Tina, I said, voice steady, are you asking me to buy a house for you? She didn't flinch, not for me, for them. Technically, it would be theirs, but yes, I'd live there too. Only so they can feel at home no matter whose week it is. I blinked. You have a home with Paul, with your other kids. She gave me a pained look like I was missing something obvious, but it's small, there's not enough space, and Paul's job isn't as stable as it was. We're trying, but this would help. Let me get this straight, I said. You want me to buy a house for your entire household to live in, including your husband and his nephew? She said nothing, which said everything. I sat back, took a deep breath, and said no. Her smile dropped. Just like that? Yes, just like that. She called me selfish, cold, accused me of putting my pride above our daughter's needs, said I was driving a wedge between the girls and their step-siblings. It was the same script, just a bigger stage. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I just said, you made choices, you built a new family, I support our kids, but I'm not responsible for making your life easier. She stood up and left without finishing her coffee. The next day, Paul called me. You don't care about the girls, he said flatly. You care about control. Then the text started again. Tina's sister, her mom, even a distant cousin I'd never met all decided to chime in with opinions about how real dads step up. But this time I didn't let it eat at me. Instead, I documented everything, every request, every guilt trip, every voicemail, and I made an appointment with my lawyer. Not to sue, not to change custody, but to protect myself. We drafted a formal financial boundary agreement, clear, non-negotiable. I didn't stop there. I sat down with my girls. Gently, I explained what fairness really means. Sometimes people will say love when they mean obligation. That it's okay to have boundaries. That daddy loves them more than anything, and that's why he won't let anyone take advantage of that love. They listened. They understood more than I expected. A week later at a school event, I showed up early. I brought flowers for each of them. I chatted with their teachers. Paul approached me and said something snide about co-parenting in luxury. I looked at him and replied, there's nothing luxurious about protecting your peace. He didn't speak again. And Tina? She watched from across the room, eyes tight, jaw clenched, not because I embarrassed her, but because she realized her power over me was gone. The man she used to guilt into buying backpacks, birthday gifts, and extra snacks had changed. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stopped playing the role she wrote for me. And that scared her more than anything. The fallout wasn't immediate. At first, Tina went quiet. No texts, no voicemails, not even a passive-aggressive note in the kids' backpacks. I figured she was regrouping, waiting for another angle, but instead the silence stretched into something else, something heavier. A few weeks later, my daughter mentioned that Allie had stopped coming to school. She's doing school from home now, she said. Paul's really mad all the time. I asked no further questions, but I listened. Turns out, Paul had lost his job again, and this time they couldn't float things with side gigs or borrowed money. The financial strain was catching up, rent behind, bills piling up. Tina picking up extra shifts at a cafe she once swore she was too qualified to work at. Meanwhile, our daughters began to notice the difference, not just in housing or meals, but in energy. Tina was exhausted, snappier, less present. Then came the kicker. Tina called me one evening, not to argue, but to ask if I could take the girls for an extra week, just until things stabilized, she said, voice soft, almost ashamed. I said yes, of course, for the girls always. When they arrived, they were quieter than usual, clung to me more, asked for seconds at dinner. That week turned into 2, then 3, and slowly the narrative began to shift, not in the courts, not on paper, but in the minds of the only people who truly mattered, our daughters. They started asking to stay longer, started calling my place home more often. I didn't celebrate it, didn't weaponize it, I just kept showing up. But word travels fast in small communities. Tina's friends, many of whom once backed her up, began keeping their distance. Some reached out to me privately to say they had no idea she'd taken things so far. One even apologized for judging me. Then, one Saturday, I bumped into Tina's mother at the grocery store. She looked tired. Not angry, not accusatory, just sad. She said, I guess you were right to set limits. We all thought you were being cruel. Turns out you were just being smart. I nodded, no gloating, just peace. Paul, on the other hand, didn't handle things so quietly. He was seen yelling in public more than once, complaining loudly at a school board meeting about unfair systems and deadbeat dads, never naming me, but everyone knew. Eventually he moved out. I never asked why, didn't need to. What mattered was this: the web of pressure they'd built around me, family, finances, appearances, had collapsed. And with it, the illusion that I needed to carry more than my fair share just to keep the peace. Tina was left with exactly what she'd created. Her choices, her household, her consequences. I didn't rub it in. I didn't gloat. I just kept living, kept parenting, kept showing my girls that love is steady, not loud. And in doing so, I watched the people who once tried to twist my devotion into obligation slowly unravel under the weight of their own expectations. These days, things are quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or avoidance, but the kind that feels earned, like the air after a storm, calm, clear. The twins are thriving. They're louder now somehow, laughing more freely, telling me stories with dramatic hand gestures and wild voices. I see pieces of myself in them and pieces of Tina too. And I've come to accept that both are okay because they're not just ours anymore, they're themselves. Last month, one of them wrote an essay for school about someone who inspires you. She chose me. It wasn't the praise that got me. It was the line that said, my dad taught me that love means protecting your heart and other people's hearts too. That stayed with me. See, for a long time, I thought love meant giving endlessly, compromising, sacrificing until there's nothing left. That's what I saw in my own father and in every cautionary tale about being a good man. But I've learned something far more powerful. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's erosion. It wears you down until all that's left is the shape of someone else's expectations. And I'm done living like that. Setting limits didn't make me cold, it made me whole. It showed my daughters what self-respect looks like. It taught them that you can care deeply and still say no, that it's not your job to fund someone else's fantasy just because they call it family. Would I do it all again? Absolutely. Even the hard parts. Because every sleepless night, every guilt trip, every awkward confrontation, it led to this: a life built on clarity, not compliance. I see Tina occasionally. We exchange updates and coordinate pickups, the usual. There's no animosity now, just distance. A respectful gap between two people who once tried to build something that was never really meant to last. Um, she hasn't brought up money again. Not once. Maybe she's learned too. Or maybe she's just tired of hearing no and meaning it. Either way, I wish her well, because this story was never about revenge. It was about release. Letting go of the need to be everything to everyone, letting go of guilt that wasn't mine to carry, letting go of the version of myself that thought love only counted if it hurt. Now I love differently, stronger, cleaner. And when I look at my daughters, I don't just see them, I see the man I had to become to give them the stability they deserve. And for once, that's enough.